Had you have my heart? All you're looking for is me. Can't tell me what you need. Boy, you know just who you are. Hold my hand, don't go too far. All you're looking for is me. Can't tell me what you need. What you babe, 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 what you need, babe, babe. Tell me what you need, babe, 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 what you need, what you need.
I don't know who's Margot.
Energy, matter, and cycle. Matter includes many different kinds of substances, many of which occur in cycles throughout the biosphere. These substances include carbon, nitrogen, phosphorus, oxygen, and many other substances. This creates many natural cycles within the biosphere. For example, is the carbon cycle. So here's a clip about carbon cycle.
Carbon is one of the most important elements on Earth. All living things are made of carbon. Most of the fuels that humans use for energy are primarily made of carbon, including the food we eat. Gases made from carbon, such as carbon dioxide, play an important role in regulating climate. Biological activity causes carbon to be constantly converted among different forms and locations. These movements of carbon are referred to as the carbon cycle. The global carbon cycle describes the exchanges of carbon between the atmosphere, terrestrial vegetation, soils and organic matter, ocean, and fossil fuels. These exchanges are continually changing and not in perfect balance. Human activities are converting oil, coal, natural gas, plant and soil organic carbon into carbon dioxide, which is accumulating in our atmosphere, where it contributes to the greenhouse effect. The atmosphere is a relatively small reservoir of carbon, containing less than 1% of the Earth's total carbon pool. Because it's so small, even a slight increase in inputs to the carbon atmosphere can have a big impact on the total concentration over time. The amount of carbon in terrestrial vegetation is comparable to the amount of carbon in the atmosphere. Vegetation takes carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere through photosynthesis. However, the amount that humans continue to add through fossil fuel emissions is more than plants are able to use, so it accumulates in the atmosphere. The CO2 that plants are able to use becomes new plant tissue. Most of the plant tissue winds up naturally dying and falling to the ground to become plant litter and eventually is decomposed or transformed to soil organic matter. In many parts of the world, organic matter accumulates faster than it decomposes, adding to soil carbon pools. Within the soil, there is more than twice as much carbon locked up in organic material than there is carbon in the atmosphere. Human activities such as land use changes and greenhouse gas emissions accelerate the conversion of soil carbon to carbon dioxide. So why is this important? Carbon dioxide is a major greenhouse gas, which causes heat to be retained between the Earth and the atmosphere. Some radiation leaving the Earth's surface is trapped by greenhouse gases, causing heat to be retained. This happens because CO2 absorbs outgoing infrared radiation and re-emits it in all directions, including back down to the Earth's surface. This leads to increased temperatures in the lower atmosphere, which in turn can increase the rate of decomposition, which further increases the amount of atmospheric carbon. This creates a magnifying cycle of increased warming and increased atmospheric carbon. It's important to understand the overall exchanges of carbon to understand this process.
So that is how carbon cycle process. So now let's move on. However, there are many other cycles that can be explored. Some very interesting cycles are the nitrogen cycle, the water cycle, and the accumulation of toxins in top-level predators. An important difference is seen in energy in that it does not cycle within an ecosystem. Instead, it enters the system when it is captured by primary producers and exits the system as it's used by a wide variety of organisms.
The most important processes in nature for the flow of energy are seen in the opposing processes of photosynthesis and respiration. Using a light-powered proton pump, chloroplast harvests energy from the sun and place it into sugar. Small organisms and larger animals eat these plants using the energy to build their bodies. This energy passes through the ecosystem via the food web. Eventually, all the energy not used up by organisms before they die is used up by decomposers in the soil.
Plants capture the sun's energy and use it to synthesize complex energy-rich molecules from molecules of carbon dioxide and water. Because plants and other photosynthetic organisms use energy from the sun and inorganic molecules from the environment to produce organic molecules needed for life, they are called producers. Plants are called producers because they make their own food inside themselves. Producers use cellular respiration to supply the energy they need to live. The organisms that consume the producers, called consumers, derive energy and matters from the breaking down the producers' molecules, use them to synthesize their own structures, and then may be consumed by other organisms. Consumer, a living thing that gets its energy by eating producers or other living things. Consumers cannot use the sun's energy directly like producers. Instead, they must eat producers or other animals to obtain energy. Decomposers, organisms that break down dead producers and consumers and organic waste, obtain the energy they need to live from chemical bonds of the dead and waste matter. The energy is transferred both to the decomposers and to the ecosystem. Decomposition of bodies and wastes releases nutrients back into environment to be recycled by other organisms. This helps release trapped energy in dead organisms back to the earth. Food webs and energy pyramids are models of representation that can be used to track the flow of energy in the ecosystem. Food webs detail the flow of energy through the populations in the ecosystems, whereas the pyramid model quantifies the flow of energy through various levels in an ecosystem. Continual input of energy from sunlight is necessary to keep ecosystems organized and functioning. The idea here is that whether there is no oxygen or there is oxygen, ecosystems can be built on any source of energy. The carbon molecules used to store energy are released as carbon dioxide by respiration from both animals and plants. This frees up carbon dioxide to be reused in photosynthesis, creating a closed system of carbon dioxide within the biosphere. Energy is produced by autotrophic organisms through photosynthesis and transferred through food chains at all levels of organisms. The soil provides nutrients for plants and animals to survive. Food chains reveal how matter and energy is transferred within ecosystems. When nutrients decompose, they return their energy to the soil, perpetuating the cycle of energy transfer and transformation. Energy and matter in ecosystems are conserved. Cycles of matter involve living organisms and non-living parts of ecosystems. Organisms obtain matter from their ecosystems and release matter back to it. All matter that make up organisms pass through food chains and eventually decomposes into very small particles that will interact with others and form other types of matter and new organisms. Ecosystems are composed of millions of different organisms of different shapes, colors, and sizes, but are made out of the same key element, the cell. Photosynthesis or cellular respiration provide the energy necessary for life processes to occur. An ecosystem's health can be assessed by looking at the interaction of abiotic and biotic features in the ecosystem and observing how effectively the matter and energy flow within the ecosystem. An An ecosystem's health can be assessed by looking at how effectively the web of producers, consumers, and decomposers have their needs met and cycle energy and